And then there are times, like even during my first year of teaching, worshiping God was hard because I was being challenged like never before because I had never done anything where I got that kind of just automatic, we don't want you here, we don't like you, we don't care if you look like us, we don't want you teaching us, we want our old teacher back. And so I found it hard to then go into church and play and to thank God for what I was able to do because I didn't like what I was doing the majority of my time.
Hi, everyone. This is Dana Black.
And this is Chelsea Simon.
Welcome to the Collective Table. Hi, Dana here. Welcome back to the Collective Table's second season, What God Looks Like. Today's episode is near and dear to my heart, as Chelsea and I are talking with the incredible Dr. Patrice E Turner. Patrice and I are currently seminary students in the same cohort at Duke Divinity. Let me tell you a little bit about my friend Patrice. Patrice is the first female director of worship and the arts at the historical Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta, Georgia, where Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock is the senior pastor. For those who don't know, he is the first African-American senator from the state of Georgia. Prior to seminary, Patrice received her doctorate of music and music education from Columbia University. She has taught, played, performed, and conducted students of all ages in various styles of music. Did I mention she started her music career at the age of 3? Recently, she appeared in part 1 of the landmark PBS documentary, The Black Church, by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. If you haven't seen it, check it out now. Actually, listen to this episode first and then go watch it. In this episode, you'll hear Patrice talk about her faith tradition and the significant role that music has played throughout her life. What is the impact of music through worship? She'll share her experience growing up and being a part of several Black church communities and the conversations that white people must engage in to address and fight systemic racism in our structures. As always, you won't want to miss this. And when it's over, don't forget to check out the PBS documentary, The Black Church, and check out a live stream service at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Tell us a little bit about your background, your faith tradition, and how it shaped your life.
My father was a Black Baptist preacher, missionary Baptist church. Always Baptist. He was Baptist born, Baptist bred. When he dies, he was going to be Baptist dead. So I grew up in church. In fact, I tell people that I knew that music and church were going to be an important part of my life. When my mother was carrying me, her first OBGYN told her that due to her age and to some health complications, she should abort me. And so one time during a choir rehearsal, she was at choir rehearsal and she was sitting down in our former building. And they were having rehearsal and the spirit got really high. You know, that phrase, the spirit got really high. People were really praising God and worship and everything. And she kicked off her shoes and she just had herself a ball and had a good time in the Lord and praised God in a dance and everything. And she remembers one of our members coming down to console her and sit with her. And then afterwards they said, you cannot come to church anymore. You cannot come to rehearsal anymore because you're going to have this baby in this church. And so they were like, don't do that, to stay home and all of that. But I said that was my John leapt in his mother's womb kind of moment. And for me, that's just always been kind of the trajectory of my life. So music has been integral. When I was a baby, I wouldn't respond to you unless you sang my name. You had to go, Patrice, it's good to see you. You had to sing to me. When my brother went away to college, my brother's 15 years older than I am. Our birthdays are 5 days apart. He was born 5 days before my parents' first wedding anniversary. I was born on my parents' 16th wedding anniversary. So when he turned 18 and went away to college, even though we fought all the time when we were at home, when our parents were home and when my parents weren't with us, we got along great. But when he went away to college, it was, I guess what you would call it now is separation anxiety. And so I went through withdrawal. I wouldn't eat. They knew something was wrong with me if I didn't eat. So that's the first thing. Because I'm always ready to eat. And then I didn't talk, I was irritable. I was irritable anyway, because I was 3. But so they put me in piano lessons and I wouldn't practice. They would take me all the way out to the church to try to practice. Before they bought me a piano, I would practice at the church, but I didn't practice because And then I couldn't articulate it, but my mother realized that I wasn't being challenged and that the music wasn't hard enough for me. Once they gave me hard enough music where I was playing things with two hands and I had to practice and study and all of that, I was in and I was hooked. And so I started playing at church pretty much the same time I started playing piano. I started at 3. I started reading at 3. I started composing at 4. I was transposing and playing with other people at the age of 5. So I was playing in church and then playing in church regularly every Sunday since the age of 12. So from then on, I played in church every Sunday. I would take my keyboard. Then eventually I played the piano as musicians kind of moved around. I started conducting some of the choirs. The hardest songs that, that the conductors, other directors wouldn't get right, I would be the one that would direct them. As I went to college, I started bringing back a lot of the choral music, more classical music. I would bring that into worship, spirituals and things. We always did a lot of traditional and contemporary gospel, but I brought in that other side, that more European aesthetic side that I was learning in school that my dad grew up hearing and singing and wanting to have in worship. So now he had someone who could actually teach it properly. And our choirs learned it. They were on it. They loved it. The congregation loved it. And whereas I thought I grew up in a traditional Baptist church.
Tell us what a traditional Baptist church would look like.
So that's the thing. I'm learning what that is because I thought that our church was that, and it wasn't. Everybody's telling me that that's not the traditional Baptist way, Patrice. Like, what are you talking about? So I grew up in a church where my father believed in speaking in tongues. He understood that the Acts 1 and 2 kind of moments where people spoke in other tongues where, the actual languages, but he also believed in a prayer language. And so he had that gift. I have that gift. And so we had people in our church that were free to speak in that way, and people would interpret if, moments in worship happened. It wasn't every Sunday, didn't happen often, but that was part of our upbringing. And then he also shouted. So he praise danced. If the spirit got high or music was going or whatever, he would just start, and that wasn't necessarily part of the traditional Baptist way. Then it was more part of the African aesthetic to praise God through the dance. So you saw it a lot out of the Azusa Street movement with the speaking in tongues and praise dancing. And so Pentecostal churches, apostolic churches tended to have more of that charismatic or emotional type of response to worshiping God.
So your dad was really kind of like a trailblazer in the merging of these different ways of worship.
Very much so.
And it also sounds like you were kind of like almost his ministry partner, like he bringing you in to do this really complicated music that, fit in somehow.
Very much so. I mean, when my dad started my dad was responsible for taking me to piano lessons every Monday at 5:00. That was my time. And so I went to piano lessons and he would stay and he would pick me up. And he used to tell God, he used to pray to God and thank God. And he said, eventually I'm going to have my musician in the car with me for Sunday and I'm not going to have to worry about it, because we had musicians who were great, love my music, love them all, still love all the musicians. But we're not the most punctual people. And so, sometimes he would wonder if the musician was going to get there on time or whatever. He said, well, shoot, she's in the car with me now for Sunday school. So I'm covered.
Get there on time.
Like, as long as I was at rehearsal, I was good. And even if I wasn't, I was like, I know this stuff. I got it. And to the point where I could pretty much play and underscore the entire worship experience and follow my father. And then my father was a great singer. One of my regrets is that I never got him in the studio to really record an official project, but he's done a lot of their recordings out there of him. So, he would sing and there would be different things. So we would work together on songs. I'd tell him what his key is so that when he preached out of the city, preached at other churches, and he would travel a lot and be asked to do revivals, he could tell the musicians, yeah, I sing in E flat. I hoop in D flat. I sing in E flat.
What a special memory for you to carry of your father, to do this work together with him for so long, and for him to be able to see you really grow in that, and for you to be able to learn from him. What a special relationship that must have been.
And then ultimately this becomes your profession. You go on to get your doctorate of education in music.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever get just kind of drained by it? Do you still find it all the time filling your soul? Does it consume your soul? Is it draining on your soul? Does it depend on where you are in life?
There's a line in this song by Tamala Mann. The song is Take Me to the King. And there's a line in there that says, truth is I'm tired. And then later she says, I'm all churched out. I've never had a moment where I've been all churched out, and people have wanted me to sing that song, especially when it came out. They're like, Patrice, you got to sing this song at church. I said, well, I can't sing that line. I'm all churched out. And that's a critical line that you can't really change in the composition. But I've had moments where I've been burnt out, particularly over the pandemic early on when we had to shift from in-person worship to doing totally online worship. And I was essentially producing a television broadcast every week that was about an hour long. That was insane. It still is, but I've gotten into some processes and things now. And now that I have some additional team members that can handle some things, we're doing much better. But that was draining because I was watching literally all of our old worship experiences, trying to find great music that we could incorporate because we weren't recording anything new. And then I was in Ohio for 5.5 months during the pandemic, five months during the pandemic. So I wasn't even in Atlanta. But it was very draining. I was working nonstop all the time. I barely spent time with my family, even though they were there. My brother moved in and came and stayed with us for about 3.5 months. It was difficult. And I got, I didn't stop. And I'm a workaholic, so self-professed workaholic. So I was going 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And then folks from the office would call me about 9 o'clock in the morning and expect me to answer the phone right away. But then the creatives who were doing all of the music and the sound editing, they work at, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I'm up answering their calls and then talking to the office at the same time. And it just, that became draining. So putting in those boundaries and things, and then there are times like even during my first year of teaching, worshiping God was hard because I was being challenged like never before because I had never done anything where I got that kind of just automatic, we don't want you here. We don't like you. We don't care if you look like us. We don't want you teaching us. We want our old teacher back. And so I found it hard to then go into church and play and to thank God for what I was able to do because I didn't like what I was doing the majority of my time. One of the first class songs I taught them was Blowing in the Wind by Bob Dylan. And they were like, what is this? So I see a whole bunch of brown and black kids, from Somalia and from Columbus, Ohio. And they're like, what is this crap? Like blowing in the wind. And I'm like, but I would teach them about it. And then I would bring in the civil rights movement, why he was, popular. And I'd bring in other artists and things like that. And they were like, oh, okay. We don't want to learn this. Then I'd bring in Beethoven. Then I would teach them about Paul Robeson and Marian Anderson. And they were like, okay, this is different. But at the same time, I would also teach them about different musical artists that they were listening to. So Queen Latifah, Mystical. Mystical was a big rapper then. Some other artists that were huge then. And so I tried to do that, but I was still not doing gospel music. And so they didn't think I was a legitimate musician. So I would sit down and play something classical that they'd heard before. They'd be like, oh, you can do that? I'm like, yeah. Then I'd turn on Music Soul Child and do that. And then eventually I talked to my principal. I said, look, I'm about to lose my mind with these kids. I've got to teach them something that they know to give them, to let them know that I had street cred and that I meant business. Like I'm teaching you all of this so that you can be like me and learn all this kinds of music. So once I brought gospel music in, that kind of settled me down because now spiritually I had God in my space. And I realized that I really wasn't, although I would pray before classes and all of that, I still didn't have God like in my space. And so I felt free to do that. The children, a lot of them went to churches with whom I fellowshipped. Some of my students were members of our church. So I couldn't act up. Like I couldn't cuss the kids out because half the kids, some of the kids were kids from my church. So as much as I wanted to cuss them out, like put them up against the wall, I couldn't do it. So it kept me in check. And then after that, I found that it was easier. Once I got my footing and got through that first year of teaching, which was the worst hurdle. Once I got through that and kind of had my lesson plans in place, I was more comfortable and then everything else fell into place, like in worship at church and everywhere else. And
the people that listen to our podcast are really all over. I mean, some people have been hurt by the church, disconnected from the church, but yet are still feeling called to the risen Christ, right? They're still feeling called to that in some way, shape, or form. Other people are like, I don't know about this Christianity, but I'm willing to entertain it. And then there's people who are just in it, like us, like they're in it. They know it. They've been born and raised in it. But one of the things you just said is that you would pray before class, but it really wasn't until you started to sing and the music, the gospels, where you felt it. And so I imagine that it's different for everybody how they feel the Spirit within them. What is that like for you when you're like, did you recognize like, this is how I connect with God is when I'm singing, when I'm, and is there a certain spiritual that connects for you? Is there something that you just know you go to?
No, I think it's just every season has its own song or moment. In that season, there were two things. One, I had written a song for our youth choir that I was able to take the words. I had a religious lyrics for it, and then I just kind of modified them to make them more inspirational. And my students loved it. They were like, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to sing the solo on this song." And da 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 da. Oh, Miss Teague's gonna give me the solo on this song because it's my song, you know. And it was something that I had written. There was another song. The first song that I taught that was gospel is Jeffrey LaValle's Revelation 19:1. Hallelujah, salvation and glory, honor and power unto the Lord our God. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. Easy for any kind of choir to do, especially it's one of the songs that I suggest for choirs who want to try gospel, who've never done it before. They can do it well. And so a lot of the students came in knowing that song. So I just started playing it in class one day. They were like, "Are you going to teach us that? Oh my God, are you going to teach us that?" And I was like, "Oh, y'all think I know that?" And then, so I just kind of worked with them and we went there. But there are other pieces and other songs that minister to me. For Every Mountain by Kurt Carr is one. That's actually a song that he saw me lead that song with Broadway Inspirational Voices, which is an amazing choir in New York, to the point. And he saw a video of us and then he posted it on his page and then it went viral. So now it has like over 4.5 million views all over the world. But that's another go-to song. There's a song by Hezekiah Walker called It Shall Come to Pass. If I didn't have that song when I was working on my dissertation, I wouldn't have finished my dissertation. Because that song just really blessed me and I would be crying. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write this next page, Jesus. Okay, it shall come to pass. Yeah. So there were all, so there are different songs that carry me through different moments. There are a lot of energetic songs. I'm not really a slow song person. I love upbeat songs. So Benita Jones has an upbeat song that I love I Will Call Upon the Lord, which is I think it was, I don't know if Maranatha did it. Some crew did it, but she put a whole gospelization spin on it. And I think our music director actually did that arrangement early on. And so that's, that gets me hype. Some Mary Mary songs will get me hyped and make me feel good. So it just all depends on the season.
I've grown up in church my whole life. And I think it wasn't until seminary that I recognized the lyrics in these worship songs are so powerful and formative in our theological understanding of who God is and who God calls us to be. And like the one line that you just didn't feel comfortable singing, I'm all churched out. And just like the ways that that music really forms our idea of God. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to that. Like how do we find God in the music? Like how does that form the way that we participate in our relationship with God?
As probably most people do, they get connected to the music through not the lyrics first, but to the actual sound of the music that draws them in. And then lyrically, especially in my position as director of worship in the arts, I have to think through the lyrics. I have to take the lyrics away from and remove them from all of the music to see, okay, is this theologically what we believe in this house? And what works in this church might not work in another church. So, for example, there are songs that I would sing at First Corinthian Baptist Church, which is a church where I was in New York. As the artist in residence, there were things that were there. A lot of times we would have to change some lyrics around to make God more inclusive. If we would try not to say he as often as possible. Unless it just didn't work any other way musically. But there are some things that I just couldn't sing there that I could sing at Ebenezer, or that I could sing at Friendship, which is my home church. There was a song about baptism in the name of Jesus, which is more of an apostolic doctrine. And so in the Baptist church, that's not what we believe. We believe in Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And so one time I remember one of our choir directors was teaching this song that was by a choir in Columbus. And my dad could hear it in his office, and he came out and he just took me aside. He said, "Hey, we can't do that because we don't believe that. And this is why." So I think that a lot of songs, a lot of things that are on the radio, you have to try them by your own spirit. You need to take those songs apart and don't just listen to it ad nauseum and think that everything that people put out is correct, because it's not. And it may not be your experience. So that, like I said, there are some songs that I can't sing. And that I wouldn't sing. And I've told directors and composers, I'm like, "I'm sorry, I really want to sing your song, but I can't sing these two lines right here because that's not my testimony."
That takes so much conviction, because a lot of songs that we sing is what you were just talking about, the he language or the inclusivity of God, where I just don't see it that way. And it just takes so much conviction, especially when that's your role to direct it, to stand up and say, you know, this is teaching people something one way or another. So
right. Yeah. So I change pronouns a lot. Like I said, if it makes musical sense, I'll change pronouns. When I compose music, I try to make sure that it's as inclusive as possible. I try not to pick a whole lot of things where it's just he all of the time. But some of the great music, you just can't get around it. And so I just overlook it, because for me, I'm settled in my spirit. I know who God is, and I understand where the composers got that belief, or, you know, why they use that language, because many of them will quote the King James version of the Bible. That's still like the main text that a lot of people use. So it makes sense they're going to say he a lot.
Well, I think that it's not uncommon in everything. I mean, you know, God is historically portrayed as a he. And so it's one of the things that we have definitely tried to work on and connect with in our ministry work, Chelsea, is because I mean, God is referred to as a he. It is, God's referred to as a male often. And maybe that gets us into this conversation about being a female, you know, and what it looks like for us whether we like it or not, the three of us are in a male dominated vocation, right? I mean, I grew up having only male pastors. It wasn't until I came out to California and was 24 years old and met my first female senior pastor in the United Methodist. So we're Methodist, the United Methodist Church. And I was like, whoa, like I kind of knew there could be females, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And that was changing for me. That was definitely a change for me.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with my father not licensing women or ordaining women. But it's funny because as a kid, he would go to churches that were pastored by women back in the day. That they were few and far between. And he loved their worship style. And I think that's where he picked up a lot of that Pentecostal apostolic kind of freedom in worship. And that was ingrained in him as a kid. But that was one of the two things that I think we disagreed on in life, period, was that I believe that women were called to preach. I believe that there was biblical evidence to that, biblical support for that. And he believed the opposite. But for me, you know, I think, and this is something that I've shared with Dana, is that just in this whole call journey, you know, am I called to preach? Is this what God is calling me to do? Like, you know, one of the things a couple of things that Dad said. One, he said, you know, Patrice is going to go to preaching after I die. Like, I'm just going to tell y'all that she's going to go to preaching after I die. And then the other thing is, you know, he always wondered, he said, I pray to God that God would call you, if God's calling you to preach, that he would call you loud enough so that I could hear too. Because he always wanted to be able to be supportive. And then he didn't want me to go out and preach and be in error in my call, and then in what God was telling me to say. So he's always been very supportive of whatever ministry road I was supposed to go down. And he even said, you know, I can't be your pastor. I'm gonna always be your father, which was different because we knew of a pastor who had disowned his daughter because she felt a call to preach. And he was like, yeah, no, I don't believe in women preachers. You didn't hear that from God. And he totally disowned her. But my dad was like, I would never do that to you. He's like, I would never disown my child. And he didn't want a daughter. He wanted sons. He wanted all boys. And when the nurse said that his wife had a daughter, he was like, nope, that's not my wife. You got to go back because it's not my child. But he and I became like this, like right away. But he just, you know, but he also said that, you know, there were three pastors. He said, you got these three pastors. If you ever feel you're called to preach, either one of these, I would love for you to have as your direct pastor to talk about pastoral things. And so I never really went that route, but all three of them were and have been important mentors in my life.
In a way, like it's such a beautiful story, even in the sense where you two could have different ideas, different theologies on something, but yet you maintain that relationship. Like he said, he was always your father, even though you held a different theology on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, both of my parents were very open to us talking about anything. So any topic imaginable, I could talk to one of my parents about. Now, you know, when it came down to, you know, the more intimate details, my dad would say, go talk to your mother about that. Talk to your mother. You know, my mother was a science teacher, a health teacher, and she was my mom. So, of course, some things, you know, I would talk to her about. But I could talk to my dad about them, too. And I just think that was just our household culture.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, Patrice, in the sense that I'm reading this book, or started to read this book called "Shifting: The Double Lives of Black Women in America," and the last chapter is Black Women in the Church. Can I get a witness? And one of the last quotes, and it's by the one of the co-authors. Her name is Dr. Kumia Shorter Gordon. She says, in her years as a member of Black Baptist and Methodist congregations, which I just have to point out that everything I read in this book, they either talk about Methodist or Baptist, and you're Baptist or Methodist. I just thought that was interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah, she writes, in her years as a member of Black Baptist and Methodist congregations, Kumia, one of the authors, is struck by the virtual absence of conversations about women's issues and gender inequity. The unwillingness to acknowledge and dialogue about gender bias, the gender silence, must first be conquered in order for churches to move forward. And so I think one of the questions I have for you, and this is your experience. You're not speaking for all Black women in the church or for the Black church experience, which we haven't even talked about, the Black church documentary that you were a part of, and we need to do that. But what's your response to that? I mean, where do you feel like it's a topic that's talked about? How has it transformed over the last couple of years, however many decades you've been doing this work? What do you think?
So I think, it was probably when I was born, it was probably a taboo topic. There weren't as many women who were in pastoral leadership in the time, especially in the Baptist church, especially in the Black Baptist church. As pastors started going to seminary, diving deeper into the word and kind of just unearthing some of the scriptures that had just kind of been hidden about women, women being called to preach and women seeing visions and women really being the first ones to tell the resurrection story, right? So, my dad would say, he was like, yeah, they weren't preaching though. They were just telling. It was like, they weren't preaching. I'm like, okay, Daddy. But I think those conversations started coming up, and then there were women who were trailblazers. Of course, I can't name a lot of them, but there were women who were trailblazers that said, okay, I will not be ignored. I will not be silenced. If you're not going to allow me to preach here, then I'm going to go here to this church. Okay, well, this denomination is not going to let me move, so I'm going to go to this denomination, or whatever the case may be. And I think eventually, it took, and I'm not knocking this, it took the confidence and the support of a lot of men in leadership in order to open the doors for those women. And so, although some denominational groups support women, some don't, I get all of that. As those doors opened, more women started to walk through. And then the other thing is they got the platforms, and some of them, unfortunately, took the platform and then they decided to male bash, which I was like, this is the wrong thing to do, because yes, some men will keep the doors closed for you, but don't talk about the negative, talk about the positive, support men, like show that you're not male bashing and that you're not trying to say that you don't need a man and all this kind of stuff, because we do need men. We need each other. Everybody needs each other. And so there are a lot of great female pastors out there who are doing it, and who are senior pastors or associate pastors or executive pastors, and are in leadership and are still feminine, are still they're articulate, they're mothers, they're wives and all of that, but they're still in pastoral leadership and they can preach. They're like not terrible. I just can't stand a whack preacher, male or female. If you can't preach, like sit down, like do something else. It's okay. It's okay. Like you can be in ministry and you don't have to preach. Like there's so many different things you can do in ministry for the Lord. Preaching should not be part of your journey, but not that I can preach, like, Lord have mercy, you're talking about you preaching a sermon this weekend. And I'm like, yes, no. But, so I just think that, and I think that that's important too for women and men to see in ministry, is that it's not just the preaching call and the pastoring call and the music call. Those are the two that are kind of up in front all of the time, music and word. And so people think that many people subconsciously think that those are the only two ways in which you can minister. But that's not the case. You've got the ministry of helps. You have missions. You have evangelism. You have, teaching and Christian education. The list goes on and on. And so, I'm just grateful that my father allowed me to be able to articulate and form my own thoughts, and then to talk to him about whatever I was thinking, feeling, kind of ruminating on.
I want to make sure that we talk about Black Church, the documentary on PBS. So if the people listening have not seen it, please go. I learned so much in those documentaries about the history of the Black Church, where it has been and where it is going. One of the questions that I had when I was watching it and wanted to ask you is, there was a part towards the end, I think, where they're talking about social justice and the role of the Black church in social justice, and specifically young people. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what it said was the young people were kind of choosing to do this social justice thing separate from the church. And if you've seen that, or if you have any kind of experience or ideas about what that might look like.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple reasons why. I think one, a lot of the younger generations didn't grow up in church like we did. So they don't have this, some of them, not all of them, because we have a large number of young people in all three, and I say three, all of the churches that I've attended over my life have always had a strong youth or young people's contingent. But I think in many areas, a lot of young people didn't grow up in the church because either their parents experienced church hurt, or maybe they did, and so they walked away from the church. So this particular Black Lives Matter, I'm going to just lump it all under Black Lives Matter movement. And the Black Lives Matter movement did not grow out of the church, which is another thing. So that's why there's a disconnect sometimes between the Black church and this particular movement, because it didn't grow out of the church. Civil rights movement I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday. Civil rights movement grew in the church. It was led by a lot of ministers and pastors. And then the music was also coming from the church. So the gospels and the traditional spirituals, Negro spirituals were reshaped and reformed to be the soundtrack for the movement. So now, as you start seeing social justice action in person, there's not necessarily that same kind of connection to the Black church. But there are Black churches that believe in being vocal. Ebenezer is one of them. Our pastor has always had a platform of ending mass incarceration. He has a personal story that's connected to it with his brother, who was just released from prison several months ago, which is a wonderful testimony in and of itself. And so, there are certain churches and certain pastors who have led the way and who've been a part of that movement and who have continued the civil rights movement in other pockets and other facets. And when you look at the gospel, when you look at Jesus was not like this laid back guy that wasn't challenging the system.
Right.
And coming at things from a different way, and not just challenging the system, like religiously, politically, socially. I mean, he was challenging everybody. I mean, I don't know if I would have been able to take Jesus back in the day. I might have been like, hey, bruh, yo.
Take it down a notch.
Yeah, dude, you are 10. I need you to be down here like on 3. Like, so, but I really do think that, we talked about in our church history class about the social gospel. And there's definitely social justice from the beginning of the Bible, and really in Exodus, when you think about how God led the children out from the Egyptians and out from slavery. I mean, it's all about, the disinherited. It's all about the oppressed, and God being a God of justice and supporting those who are underserved and underprivileged. And so you would think that the church would be active in that. But some pastors that's not their calling. They don't believe that that's where they should be or what they should be preaching. Some people don't believe that that is their gift. Or maybe that they're not that, articulate, or they don't want to affect whatever other support that they get from this one or that one. And so they keep their mouths shut. And I'm not judging any of them. I think that there's space for all of that. And there are churches who do it well. I think Ebenezer is one of those churches.
Yeah, but I do wonder, is it knowing that Black Lives Matter didn't come out of the church, but yet the civil rights movement definitely came out of the church? Is there opportunity for the church and the whole church, the universal church, and certainly for the Black church to lead that experience? Is there opportunity?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and again, it's the leaders, and then it's also the members. Some members are not really big on social justice. They come to church because they want to be fed. They need to be fed spiritually, or they want to engage in social justice in a way that helps the homeless or the hungry. And so they'll give to food pantries and things like that. But the church universal, yeah, I mean, if one of us is not free, all of us are not free, right? So there's this, that's part of who we are. If we're talking about we're supposed to love God as we love ourselves, love our neighbor as we love ourselves, treat our neighbors like we would treat Jesus. Jesus was talking about, well, then you got to open your home, open your heart to those who are in prison, open your heart to those who are hungry, those who do not have a roof over their heads. That's what that's what we've been called to do. It's not easy,
No.
by any stretch of the imagination,
No.
but it's part of what we've been called to do as a body of Christ.
Amen. I mean, so true. Yeah.
Yeah, we often say Christianity does not make life easier. And in fact, a lot of ways, it makes it harder when it calls you really to stand in solidarity with the oppressed. And it calls you into deeper relationship, which is more vulnerable. And it doesn't make you have an easy life. But the joy and hope and love and the work of liberation, is worth it.
Right. And conversations like this and others need to happen even deeper in dealing with race, and how do we deal with, just the intersectionality of systemic racism with Christianity and all that entails. And I'm not saying that we need to have kumbaya moments and everybody's church should be multiracial and all of that. We have different ways of worshiping, and I'm cool with that. And I love it. I'm just as comfortable. I've never been to a quote unquote Hillsong church, but I've been to worship styles like that, like with InterVarsity, I see whatever it's called, Christian something, when we were in college. But like, I was just as comfortable in their worship experience as I was in my home church. But at the same time, we can go deeper than that. I think we have a connection of Jesus, but then, okay, well, let's talk because my people weren't allowed to sit down in the main auditorium of the church when my people were enslaved. Like, there were preachers, Methodist preachers, Baptist preachers, whoever, that owned slaves, and they own my people. So let's talk about that. And I know that wasn't you specifically, and it wasn't me specifically, but it was my family, and it's in my history. It was in your history. And so let's talk this through. And what does this mean? And how can we use that history to galvanize, not to negate it, not to whitewash it, not to overlook it, but you use it to say, okay, this is what happened then. It was okay then, or whatever. It wasn't okay, but this is what happened. And now we're using this to move forward. And the God of love, the God of justice says that we can all get along and do this, like Rodney King. Can we all just get along? We can all get along, but we have to have some heart-to-heart, gut-wrenching conversations in order to get there.
What is your suggestion so I lead a small group on, we're reading Crossing the Lynching Tree and Jesus and the Disinherited, and some books to really try to educate ourselves. But what suggestions do you have for white liberal Christians who want to be in the conversation or who want to move forward? What do you suggest as like starting places or pass along the way,
All of those two books are great. Crossing the Lynching Tree, we did a book study on that a couple of years ago at Ebenezer. Unfortunately, because I'm in school and everything, I wasn't able to participate in the CAST book study, but that's another book, Isabel Wilson, that we did. And we actually paired with St. Luke's Episcopal Church. I think that's the church. Yeah. St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Atlanta. So they're primarily a predominantly Caucasian group, Caucasian congregation. Our congregation was a part of it. We had 500 registrations. We had people from all over the world that participated. So not just from Georgia, but there were a lot of people from other states and other countries that were part of it. And it was about a 6-week long during Lent. So 6-week long study where people had intimate conversations with book groups about the text, about CAST. Ibram X. Kendi, Kendi, he's amazing in terms of anti-racism. I've just been hip to 1619, which is another project and book. I think he was part of that project as well. So there are a lot of things. I think churches coming together that are of varied cultures. I think having those types of worship experiences, the pastors, the senior leadership, they have to really be behind it and think that it's important first off. And it's good when they're friends or when they're connected to one another. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is you have to have congregations that are willing and open to participate. Not everybody's going to participate, but willing and open to have the dialogues, because you can sit around and these kinds of conversations, by this I mean within your own church, it's good to have these kind of conversations too, because people are going to feel more comfortable saying something with somebody who looks like them, and then they can find the language and feel comfortable letting it out first, and then when they start mixing with other congregations, then they won't feel as inhibited. Or initially they will, but I mean eventually they'll build that rapport, and there'll be that team kind of safe space that they build. And having those conversations with like another church in your locale, in your region, that would, to help to foster that. I think that's so important. And then worship services. Like every year we have a Shabbat service that honors Dr. Martin Luther King during Martin Luther King weekend, and we worship with the oldest synagogue in Atlanta, entitled their name is the Temple. And we worship with them. We go to their church. They have great food. Their challah is the best. It's the best bread ever. And so what we got,
food connects us.
Yeah, food connects. I mean, the table, right? The communion table, the collective table, everybody coming around, right?
That's right.
That's important. And so having those kinds of conversations and relationships help to build that bridge to be able to talk about certain topics that might have been taboo 20, 30 years ago.
That's such a great idea. And having 500 people register just speaks to the thirst that's out there for these conversations to be had. So that's great. That's a good suggestion.
And I think too, with this week, Tuesday was the 1 year anniversary. I hate to say that, 1 year commemoration, I'll put it that way, of George Floyd's death, murder. It brought it home. Like if Rodney King, and I don't know why I've said his name like a couple times today, but if seeing Rodney King on a VHS didn't really make it clear that police brutality exists and that brown and black bodies are subjugated to that for years and years, and have been with, during the lynchings, particularly in the 1800s and early 1900s, then to see his life get snuffed out the way it was, I think it just really galvanized a lot of people's hearts and minds to say, okay, I've got to do something like this. If we don't change now, it's not going to happen ever in this country. So, I'm grateful that our pastor is in political leadership. I'm grateful that John Ossoff is also there as a Jewish young man, as a senator in Georgia. And then there are others with all of, just other pastors and faith leaders who have said, okay, enough is enough. We can't sweep this under the rug anymore. Let's have these conversations. And yeah, and from all of the comments that I've received and all the feedback that I've heard about our cast book study,
I could talk to you forever because I just enjoy our conversations. So you are just, you're such a gift, and there's so much you offer, and just, from the music to your ideas to your thoughts, there's so much there. There's so much depth. There's so much richness. And I'm thankful that you're giving us this time and that our audience is going to hear your voice. It's a voice that needs to be heard. It's a song that needs to be sung. So I'm very grateful for your time.
I totally understand why Dana's been like, you have to talk to Patrice, because she's like, it's just going to be such a wonderful conversation. And it was, and I hope we can do a part 2 and follow up, because I think right now, like towards the end, we really started to like get into some good stuff. But I think we also like to leave with you having the last word. Is there like a message or an idea or a thought that you kind of want to leave our listeners with?
Wow.
Maybe there's a lot.
I don't know. I mean, go see the Black Church, watch the documentary if you haven't seen it. I have my own EP that I put out in 2014, right after my father died, right before I went to Sweden for the first time. It's called Introducing Patrice E Turner, which is 5 songs, 3 of which I think, 1, 2, 3 I wrote, and one song on there was the first song I wrote after my dad passed. My dad also has a song on there, and but in terms of like a closing word, I think one of the things that I realized with the pandemic was that I forgot or didn't worship on my own. I was so consumed with making sure that the worship experience for Ebenezer went off well, and that I would put all of my heart and soul into my work. But I didn't take time to really just make sure that I was connecting with God regularly. Always connect with God. Always just take a moment to breathe and remind yourself that God's Spirit is breathing through you and working through you, and that God has gifted you for such a time as this. And even if you don't know what your journey is, what your path is. Don't worry about that. Just focus on the gifts that God has given you. And God will use those to God's glory in the right time. And prepare yourself. Like preparation. I don't know how many degrees I have. People ask me all the time. I don't know, child. Look at my CV. But like, because I don't really care, right? But I mean, I do care. But all of that has been preparation. And every moment in which I found myself is a preparation moment, from teaching, from conversations like this. You know, you'll draw on those things. And so just make sure that you don't stay connected to your source, stay connected to God, and God will stir up the gifts in you when God needs you to move forward. And if you say no, God will chase you. What was my nickname for myself? Jonah. I was Jonice, or Jonah Ice, or something. I was somebody. Jonah, the female version of Jonah, and the female version of Jeremiah, because I'm always crying in class. And I'm always
and God chased down Jonah.
And God chased down Jonah, and God chased down Patrice. So,
amen.
You know, just enjoy the ride, and don't forget to praise and worship God any chance you get.
You fill my heart. You fill my heart. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. It was great.
It was wonderful. And we'll do part 2 sometime soon.
I think
sometime after what is it, July the 30th? What is our last paper due? August the 3rd or something? Something for August the 3rd, whatever.
But I do think, you know, now that we're but I think it would be great to continue this conversation and just and continue talking about race in our country. Like you said, like we have to have these conversations, you know.
And that's not my bag. I mean, that's really not my area. In elementary school, I went to a pretty multicultural school. When I got to 6th grade, I got called the N-word for the first time. And you just would have thought, I was like, oh, Lord, what is going on? You know, but I was in a predominantly Caucasian space. And so I was infringing upon their space, or on this one girl's space. But that got rectified, you know, but just learning how to talk with my friends. And I think, and that was with the shifting thing too, learning how to be in those spaces. And then when I was with my girlfriends and with my boys and all that, I had a different way of talking and a different way of acting and letting my hair down, so to speak. But to know how to be, because although, you know, we made this disclaimer that I don't speak for the race, in many instances and in many rooms, I spoke for the race. And I was in one class where I wasn't just the only Black person, but I was also the only girl. So I spoke for the gender. Like, so, you know, just, and that was as a kid. So learning how to have those conversations with people. And I think once people get over like my initial raw in your face kind of personality, they see that I'm someone that you can just come and talk to, and I'm easy to talk to. And so they feel comfortable asking me questions. And if I don't know the answer, we just kind of talk through it together and learn from each other.
Thank you so much for listening. Just like everyone we are interviewing throughout this series reflects the sacred and holy image of God, so do you. Together, we are what God looks like.
The Collective Table is supported by San Diego United Methodist Church in Encinitas, California.
A big thank you to the team at Castos, especially our producer Stuart Barefoot and our content editor Claire Watson.
The original music heard in this episode was created and performed by Mystic Mercy.
Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, YouTube channel, and our newsletter.
If you'd like to financially support the work of The Collective Table, please visit thecollectivetable.org. There you can also find out more about who we are and view past episodes.